morning. Good morning. So today I want to talk about, I think one of the, I don't like, a really important part of working with children in play therapy that I think doesn't get enough um, representation, shall we say, as the individual therapy. And I've been pondering this a lot lately, like, why is it that in play therapy the standard is individual? And I one of the things that I thought about, I'd be curious about what you guys think, so feel free to post. Today I want to talk about emotion dysregulation in play therapy, and one of the ways I think doesn't get enough representation. And it's one of the more critical things that we need to do in order to get success for our clients. And I was thinking about why the typical way of providing play therapy is individual sessions. And I was thinking, like, when in graduate school, when you're going to get your master's degree, it's predominantly an adult focus. Like, you typically learn about psychotherapy models and theories, and they all are an adult model. And for adults, the standard is we see them individually for the most part. We do some adjunct, typically, maybe some family therapy, maybe couples therapy, marriage therapy, but predominantly the typical way of doing that is individual. And I think that's carried over into mindsets for working with children and adolescents, because I think we tend to look at their individual needs, that we think about who is the client, the child is the client, which is true. All of these things are true. And I'm not suggesting that we don't do individual play therapy sessions. I'm suggesting that we take a look at one of the main components of play therapy that often doesn't get the attention that it needs to get, and that is seeing the children within context. And that means seeing them within the context of their family with parents. And so I think in order to really have good, solid results for your child and adolescent clients using play therapy, you really need to integrate parents. You need to have a plan. You need to have a framework that you're using in order to integrate parents. And that is what I want to talk about today, how to go about doing that. Or why is it important to do that, and what kind of lens are you looking at in order to understand and communicate to parents what their role is. And I think as mental health professionals, it's our responsibility to communicate to the parent what our expectations are, what their role is, what's the reason that's their role. So why is it their role, so that they understand they're coming to us as the experts. So I believe it's important for us as the experts to communicate that to the parents. And that's what I want to talk about today, especially in regard to emotion dysregulation problems for children. So if you're joining me live today, please go ahead, put your name in the comments. I would love to see who's here today. Post your name, where you're from, what population you work with. Are you integrating parents? How do you communicate to parents? I'd love to hear your feedback. So my name is Kathy Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a registered play therapist supervisor here in the United States. And I have about 30 years experience in the mental health field. And my modality of choice is play therapy. I was introduced to play therapy when I was a special education teacher back in the 80s, and then it took a while to find. So this was before there was an internet. Took a while to find where to get good training, where to get supervision, because I am a firm believer that is a game changer to help you with your skills, getting good supervision or consultation and getting good training. So if you are watching live, go ahead, post your name in the comments. So let's get started. First and foremost, when you think about emotion dysregulation or emotion regulation problems, you are typically, those kids on your caseload are typically having meltdowns. They're super anxious and they have meltdowns because their anxiety and has gotten the better of them and they just kind of come unglued. Maybe they're angry and aggressive, and maybe they're yelling and screaming at home. Maybe they are physically aggressive. Maybe they're physically aggressive at school, and parents are getting phone calls. Typically, parents of these children are worried. They're worried about their kids. They are worried their kids aren't going to have a successful life, because they know in order to be successful, you've got to be able to regulate those strong emotions. So they bring their child to you in the hopes that you are going to be able to help their child learn how to tame those emotions, to get them under control so that their child can be successful. Or maybe the school is calling parents because their child is getting suspended a lot. Or maybe the courts are involved because the child has gotten into doing some things that are not really healthy, and in fact they're illegal. So they're bringing their child to you, or the court is ordering them to go to counseling, and with the hopes that you are going to make a difference. Hey, Vanessa. So Vanessa is joining from Corpus Christi. Oh, you're an MSW student. That's awesome. So I finished my master's in social work back in 1992. And in my program, I think my program was very different. I don't know if it was a sign of the times, but in my program, I was in a child and family welfare concentration, like specialization. All mine was family therapy. So I'm a social worker, but I feel like in my heart, I'm more of a marriage and family therapist. So I think now they definitely, in graduate school, you do get some family therapy classes, which is good. They weren't doing that for the most part when I was in graduate school. I think that's changed, and now I notice they do more of an integrated approach. I mean, meaning you get at least one class learning family therapy. All of mine were family therapy. I think maybe that's where I kind of get my my kind of bent towards viewing children in context and with their family. And to be honest, for the longest time, I did the traditional meet with the kid, maybe 5 minutes after the session, do my little check-ins with parents in front of the kids. And then what I realized, that really was not effective. I was getting really, really frustrated because I was having a hard time getting buy-in from parents and even getting them to meet with me on occasion. And so when I really sat down and kind of had a chat with myself, what I realized was I wasn't communicating that they need to be involved. I wasn't communicating to parents the reason they need to be involved. I wasn't communicating to parents my expectation, predominantly because I didn't know my expectation. Because when I started to get training in play therapy, and even the supervision that I got, there wasn't really any focus on working with the parents. And so that's when I kind of had a chat with myself, went back to my social work roots in graduate school and back to my early learning, right? Like my right out of when I got out of my master's program, I graduated and I got my first job. It was all family focused. And so when I thought about it, I thought, well, as in play therapy, I'm not really communicating to parents. I don't even know myself. And so I had to get clarity with myself. Why do parents need to be involved? What are my expectations? And how am I going to communicate that to parents so that they understand the importance of their role? And here's the thing, if we look at, hi, Jean. So Jean is from New York. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Looks like you're an art therapist. So cool. I love chatting with art therapists about using art therapeutically. Um, so if we look at the neuroscience, and I love using a neuroscience and attachment lens in the work that I do. So that's predominantly my theoretical framework. If we look at neuroscience and we look at attachment theory, what we know is children's neurocircuitry is not developed. Their neurocircuitry is in development because part of emotion regulation is engaging the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, and that is still developing well into the mid to late 20s. So all of that emotion regulation circuitry is developing. They have really an immature emotion regulation circuitry, children do. So they need their parents. Parents are key to helping children learn how to regulate their emotions just through their attunement with their child, staying calm and present in the moment more often than not. Like we know, we're not expecting perfection from parents because that's not even realistic. We know good enough parenting more often than not will get the job done. We know they work through that rupture and repair. We all do that. Even in our work lives, our own family lives, we're always working through that. But what we know is from neuroscience and attachment theory, the adults in the child's life are critical for emotion regulation. And we call that co-regulation. Parents need to be co-regulating with their child. And so to me, if we're using that lens and we're working with children who have emotion regulation problems, then we also know that we need to get the adults involved. We need their parents to be involved. If they're dysregulating at school, we need some help from the grown-ups at school to figure out a plan for that. Because what we know is their neurocircuitry is not working very well. And the more intense the emotion regulation, the more critical it is for adults to get involved to help with co-regulation. So then that brings, so we know from neuroscience and attachment that that's the thing. If we're using that lens, then we know that we need to get parents involved. And so that's the next thing that's really important is, one, what's the reason? Like if I'm working with emotion regulation, what's my theoretical model that I'm using to help me understand what's going on? I like using neuroscience and attachment because I think the brain is the boss of the body. And if we can get that, if we can help children regulate and get that mind-body connection working more effectively, then they will continue to develop that neurocircuitry in an effective way that's going to help them into adulthood. So that means then we need to partner with parents. And how do we do that? First, we have to explain to them the neuroscience and attachment component of it. So we need to kind of explain that the emotion regulation is, we explained the neuroscience part of emotion regulation a little bit, but mostly the focus is on co-regulation. The way that I explain that to parents is, and we have to do it a lot. I mean, think about how many times we have to hear things over and over so that we fully understand it. So then we need to kind of partner with parents in order to help them understand it as well. And so one of the ways that I explain it to parents is, I basically will say, as children, we know children are developing their emotion circuitry. If you think about when your child was a baby and they would cry and you would soothe them, or you would try and figure out what their needs were, then they would regulate. But if you didn't get involved, then that didn't help them regulate their emotions. And so that they still need you, because that neurocircuitry is still developing. And the younger they are, the less likely they're going to be able to do it on their own. So it's kind of like they need to borrow your emotion regulation circuitry for a little while until they can learn to internalize that and be more effective. But that's going to be a long-term project. And starting now when they're young, if they're coming young, or even if they're adolescents, it looks different in adolescents, but adolescents still need their parents to co-regulate with them. I mean, think about it. If you're an adult and you're in a heated argument, if both people are not regulating their emotions, that typically does not go well. And then sometimes when it's really bad, it could end up in physical aggression towards one another if somebody doesn't kind of step away. So even as adults, if you're in an argument with another person, or maybe you're having a disagreement, the more likely at least one person is able to stay regulated, then there's a higher likelihood of a more productive outcome. You might not get it solved in that moment. So, I mean, even as adults, we need that co-regulation. So in my mind, why wouldn't we do it for kids whose emotion regulation is much less mature? And so explaining co-regulation to parents. I think the other thing is, to be able to partner with parents, you have to really get clear on what your expectations are, and then make sure you communicate that to parents. But I do think as play therapists, if you really want to partner with parents, you've got to develop that relationship with them as well. And that takes time, and it takes intention to be able to do that. So in some ways, our ability to form that therapeutic rapport with parents then provides support to the parents, so that then they can do the job that they need to do, which is to work with their child and help their child get co-regulated. And that takes time. And what my experience has been, just those 5-minute check-ins, which they're never 5 minutes, plus they're in front of the child. Sometimes you need to just kind of meet with parents alone, have that private time to talk through some things, teach the parents some things, give them some tips, have them give you some feedback about what's working, what's not working, so that you can together help their child. And it's been my experience, because I do a lot of supervision and trainings as well. Like I have an online supervision group. I do a lot of online trainings. I'm going to talk about one of my trainings. Like I have a training coming up for children for play therapists and working with children with emotion regulation problems. I have a live webinar coming up on December 3rd. So I'll talk about that a little bit. But one of the things I talk about in the training is we do a really thorough overview of attachment and neuroscience and that mind-body connection, because understanding that then helps you understand what interventions you're going to use. So the play therapy interventions. But the other thing is that also helps you understand why parents are critical for emotion regulation as their co-regulators. But also the other thing is, like, if you even use like the last 15, 20 minutes of your play therapy session, whatever skills you've been going over with the child, if you're doing more directive play therapy, you can bring the parent into sessions for like the last 15, 20 minutes, have the parent and the child practice the skills together, come up with a plan, how parent's going to help them use those skills at home. And then when they come back, you can see how that goes. But then you're now engaging parents as the partner. I would still recommend that you meet with parents periodically. Like, I try to do it at least once a month, maybe every 6 weeks, but I try not to go longer than 6 weeks, where you bring parents in. It's just you and parents. And I would bring, if it's a 2-parent household, make sure you bring both parents in. Make sure that both parents are engaged. And that, because parents need each other. Parenting is hard, man. You got to have support. And that's one of the ways you can support parents, is helping them figure out how to work more collaboratively together and get both parents involved, because I know sometimes that's a little challenging to do that. So if you have an intentional plan, though, and you understand the importance of including parents, then you're going to integrate that as part of your play therapy process, and you'll get better results in the end. Because here's the other thing. Children come in to your session. Let's say you're doing 45 minutes a week or 60 minutes a week, but it's weekly. That's 1 hour out of like almost 170 hours a week. I calculated it. So 1 hour out of, I think it was 167 hours per week. That's not a lot of time. Who's with the child the rest of the time? Well, the rest of the time it's their parents, and they're at school. So to me, that's the other thing that's really important, is that homeschool connection. If children are having a hard time at school, maybe they don't show it at school, but maybe they're coming home and dysregulating at home because they're just kind of white knuckling it at school all day. The other thing is, if you partner with parents and they become a really critical part of the treatment process, then you can also support parents to know how to help advocate at school to get their needs met. Typically, that is using the support of school counselors, maybe school social workers, and partnering, helping parents partner up with the school counselor or the school social worker, who can then advocate even more within the system and come up with a plan to help alleviate some of those stressors at school, if that's also happening there. And the likelihood that if you have a child who's having emotion regulation problems pretty significantly, the more severe the emotion regulation problems are, the more likely that that's going to show up at school, and they may have problems at school, or at least they may be white knuckling it at school, because they don't want to get in trouble, and it's kind of embarrassing. They don't want to be the bad kid because they already feel like the bad kid at home. So to me, the other part of building that partnership with parents is helping parents to get that the home and the school connection. Because if we go back to what I originally started out talking about, if you look at your theoretical model, if we look at emotion regulation, you're looking at neuroscience and attachment, and maybe kids need somebody to help co-regulate them at school. And that would be an important thing for parents to take more of that active leadership, advocacy role for their children. So so that's kind of the thing for today. So that is it. I am a little off today. My dog is not doing well, so I'm a little worried about my dog. So I feel like I'm a little scattered today. She's going to the vet tomorrow. Anyways, so just a little recap for today. First and foremost, if we look at neuroscience and attachment, we know that children need the adults in their lives to help them regulate their emotions. Parents and adults need to be effective with co-regulation. And we know from the work of Daniel Siegel, he talks about resonant circuits that children parents will even physiologically resonate mind to mind, is what he calls it, with their child. We do that with other people too, like in your family and any of your relationships, really, especially your more intimate relationships. And by intimate, I don't necessarily mean sexual. I mean, these are like you live with people, they know who you are. They know when you're in a bad mood. They know when you're being quiet. They pick up being part of that is when you're kind of reading their signs. But the other part of it is what Daniel Siegel talks about, those resonant circuits where we're even physiologically tuned in to the other person. That's through those mirror neurons. And so that's the co-regulation piece, where you're helping parents understand that co-regulation and the need for co-regulation. But kids need it at school too. So communicating that to parents. So that to me is the main reason that it's really important for play therapists to have an intentional plan. And in the training that I'm doing on December 3rd, a lot of what we go over is that neuroscience and attachment lens about emotion regulation, different reasons there may be emotion dysregulation problems, because you have to kind of use your detective mode. And that's what I talked about last week in last week's live. So if you're interested in that, you can hop over to my YouTube channel and watch all the replays over there. If you're watching on LinkedIn, you can go. They're a little harder to find on LinkedIn. So it's probably easier to go over to my YouTube channel, Kathy Spooner, Renewing Hearts Consulting. You can go into the lives section, and I have all my lives in there. But last week I talked a lot about the importance of using your detective mode to find out what's going on, so you can kind of hone in on what's causing the problem. And so we talk about that in my training coming up. We talk about that in my supervision group. It's an online supervision group. And the role of parents understanding co-regulation to help parents understand their role, which is why you can use parents as, like, I call them like skills coaches, because the child's in your office like once a week for maybe an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, but they're out in the community all the other times. That's where the real work gets done. And so really having that intentional plan with parents will help the child be able to be more effective, and then even more effective long term. Then that also brings us to that when you're partnering with parents, the other thing that will help is you supporting parents to know how to advocate at school, get things set up at school. If things are needed at school, you can find out how they're doing at school. If you partner up with the adults there, you can help get a plan in place where the adults at school are helping their child to regulate their emotions at school and get a plan. Because ultimately, if children are dysregulating at school and they're having problems at school, their self-esteem is terrible. They feel like a bad kid. They're kind of getting angry looks from adults or frustrated looks from adults, and they internalize that, and that sometimes can make it worse. With the externalizing behaviors, they may act out more. Sometimes they may kind of go inward more, and their self-esteem takes a big hit. So they may have a really negative self-esteem view of themselves, and we know that can lead to even worse problems down the road. So being able to target things early for children is going to be the most effective thing for them, and being able to form that partnership with school staff will add an extra layer of good support for the child, and coming up with a way to help the child regulate their emotions at school is going to require co-regulation by the adults at school. So that is it for today. Just here we go. Sorry, I was in the wrong place. Just if you're interested, I do have a training coming up. It's a live webinar. It's called CAPES. CAPES is the kind of the framework that I came up with to work with children who have emotion regulation problems, because I find if you go strictly behavioral with kids like this, you kind of miss a lot. And so I like using a neuroscience and attachment framework when I'm working with kids. And so one of the things I've learned over the last 30 years in the mental health field is having a framework really helps you. It's like your GPS guiding you through the treatment process. And so CAPES is an acronym for kind of a way of being, but ways of thinking about the treatment process, because most of us as play therapists use an integrated approach. And so in my mind, if I'm integrating in different types of interventions, play therapy interventions, I wanted kind of a framework to ground them in so that I can have consistency, and I'm kind of using a consistent way of conceptualizing what's going on with my client, because then that's going to also help me figure out what interventions I need to use. So CAPES stands for curiosity, attunement and authenticity, play, so the playfulness, using the therapeutic powers of play. And then E is environmental context, looking at your child holistically, or your child-client holistically within their environment to get a better sense of what's going on, but also a better sense of who needs to be involved in the treatment process. And then S is structuring your sessions, structuring who's going to be involved, what is that going to look like, how often, what are you going to do in the sessions, and those kinds of things. So, and we do lots and lots of activities. There's a lot of group interaction. I find that that's one of the things I like about the live webinars, is that small group interaction. So you not only get my 30 years of knowledge and experience, you get the brilliance of those in the group or in the training as well. So in that small group interaction, I think is really, really helpful. So so that's it for today. If you're interested in the training, you can go over to my website. It's called, my website is rrhcounseling.com /courses. So rrhcounseling.com/courses. The training is CAPES, a framework using play therapy with challenging children and teens. There are CEs available if you're interested in that. So if you found this information helpful, please share it across your social media platform. I live stream every week on Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Pacific time. So I live stream onto LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and my Facebook group for mental health professionals using play therapy and expressive arts with children, adolescents, and families. That group is called Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground. It's free if you're on Facebook. I post other resources in there. I like to nerd out on articles, so I'll post some different things that are, I think, helpful for play therapists to keep on top of what the research and what the literature is saying. I like posting those in there. So, all right. And I am not going to be going live next week here in the United States. Next Thursday is Thanksgiving. So Wednesday is usually a travel day or downtime. My kids are coming into town, so I'm very excited about that. My kids are grown and out of the house for the most part, but I love it when they come visit. So I won't be going live next week. If you have questions about the training or questions about my online supervision, feel free to message me. I'd be happy to get back to you. And I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.